3 months after Hyun's campaign began, the legal consequences were becoming clear. Kim Tae-won sat in a downtown courthouse, his expensive lawyer struggling to defend against overwhelming evidence of labor law violations. The man who once strutted through his glass office now looked pale and defeated. The judge read the verdict with cold precision. "Mr. Kim, your company is found guilty of systematic wage theft, unsafe working conditions, and intimidation of employees. You are ordered to pay $2 million in back wages and fines. Your business license is suspended for 1 year." Tae-won's face crumpled as the gavel fell. His company was finished. The workers he had cheated for years would finally receive the money they deserved. More importantly, other employers in the city now knew that abusing workers carried real consequences. In another courtroom across town, Choi Min-ho faced criminal charges for food safety violations and bribery. The evidence against him was so complete that his lawyer had advised him to plead guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence. "Your restaurants put dozens of people in the hospital," the prosecutor said during sentencing. "You knew about the health violations and chose profit over public safety. You bribed inspectors to hide problems that could have killed someone." Min-ho received 2 years in prison and a lifetime ban from operating food service businesses. The man who had once thrown students' lunches in the trash now understood what it meant to lose everything. Yang Sun-ho's trial was the most dramatic. Families he had terrorized for years came forward to testify about his threats and illegal collection methods. The courtroom was packed with his victims, many of them speaking publicly for the first time about their experiences. "He told me he would hurt my children if I did not pay," testified one elderly woman. "I gave him my medicine money because I was so afraid. I went without heart medication for 3 months because of him." The judge sentenced Sun-ho to 5 years in prison for extortion, illegal lending, and criminal intimidation. As he was led away in handcuffs, he looked directly at Hyun, who sat quietly in the gallery. "This is not over," Sun-ho mouthed silently. But Hyun knew it was over. The network of corruption that had protected these men for years was broken. Other predators in the community had seen what happened to bullies who thought they were untouchable. The message was clear: abuse would be exposed and punished. The real victory, however, was not in the courtrooms but in the community itself. The culture of silence that had protected bullies was being replaced by one of mutual support and accountability. At Hyun's old high school, Park Ju-won implemented new anti-bullying programs based on what they had learned. Students now had multiple ways to report problems safely. Teachers received training on recognizing intimidation tactics. Most importantly, the school created a network of peer support that made it almost impossible for bullies to isolate their victims. "The difference is amazing," Ju-won told Hyun as they walked through the school hallways. "Students who used to eat lunch alone now have friends. Kids who were afraid to speak up in class are raising their hands. The whole atmosphere has changed." Similar changes were happening throughout the community. Workers knew their rights and had resources to defend them. Families dealing with financial problems could get help without falling prey to loan sharks. Small business owners supported each other instead of competing destructively. The transformation was not without resistance. Some people complained that Hyun had been too harsh on his former classmates. They argued that everyone deserved second chances and that destroying careers was excessive punishment. These critics found little support in the community. Too many people had suffered under the old system where bullies faced no consequences for their actions. The victims who finally found their voices were not interested in protecting the people who had hurt them. Local newspapers ran follow-up stories about the long-term effects of Hyun's campaign. Crime rates were down because predators knew they would be caught and punished. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements as workers felt safer reporting problems. Student performance increased as schools became more supportive environments. The breakthrough came when Hyun arranged for an undercover social worker to approach Sun-ho for a loan. The woman wore a hidden camera and microphone, as Sun-ho explained his illegal methods for collecting debts and threatening borrowers who fell behind on payments. The recording was devastating. It showed Sun Ho openly discussing how he used violence and intimidation to extract money from poor families. He bragged about targeting single mothers and elderly people because they were too afraid to fight back. Hyun released the recording along with financial records that proved Sun Ho was charging interest rates far above legal limits. He also provided contact information for every family that Sun Ho had victimized, encouraging them to speak to police and lawyers. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Families who had suffered in silence for years suddenly found their voices. They filed complaints, gave interviews to reporters, and shared their stories on social media. The pattern of abuse became impossible to ignore. Within a week, Sun Ho was arrested on charges of illegal lending, extortion, and criminal intimidation. The man who had built his adult life on fear and threats found himself facing years in prison. But Hyun's campaign went beyond just destroying his enemies. Following his mentor's advice about building rather than destroying, he worked with Ju-won to create support systems for future victims. They established anonymous reporting systems at local schools so students could safely report bullying. They organized legal aid clinics where workers could learn about their rights without fear of retaliation. They created support groups for families dealing with loan sharks and financial predators. Most importantly, they changed the conversation in their community. People who had once stayed silent out of fear now spoke up about injustice. The network that had protected bullies was replaced by one that protected victims. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Former classmates who had been scattered and isolated began reconnecting and supporting each other. Workers who had been afraid to complain found strength in numbers. Students who might have become victims learned that help was available. Local news stations began following the story, impressed by how one veteran's return had sparked such widespread positive change. National media picked up the story as an example of how communities could solve their own problems when people found the courage to work together. Hyun watched it all with quiet satisfaction. His enemies had been defeated not through violence or revenge, but through truth and community action. Their victims had found their voices and their power. The changes would last long after the initial confrontations were forgotten. As he walked through his old neighborhood on Friday evening, Hyun saw the difference everywhere. People made eye contact instead of looking away. Workers walked with confidence instead of fear. Students laughed freely instead of watching over their shoulders for predators. The scared teenager who had left Earth 5 years ago could never have imagined this outcome. But the man who had learned wisdom from alien civilizations understood that true victory meant creating a world where future victims would never stand alone. Monday morning marked the beginning of Hyun's new strategy. Instead of confronting his enemies directly, he would expose them to the light of public scrutiny. His alien mentors had taught him that information warfare required patience and precision, qualities that his bullies had never developed. His first target was Kim Tae-won's company. Hyun spent 3 days interviewing workers who had been mistreated, carefully documenting their stories with video recordings and written statements. He used his military training in intelligence gathering to build an unshakable case. The breakthrough came when he met Lee Yoon-ji, a young accountant who had been fired for questioning illegal pay practices. She had kept copies of financial records that proved Tae-won was stealing money meant for employee wages and benefits. "I was afraid to speak up before," she told Hyun as they sat in a quiet coffee shop. "But seeing you stand up to him gave me courage. Maybe together we can actually change something." Hyun combined her evidence with testimonies from a dozen other workers. He organized the information like a military intelligence report, with clear facts and supporting documentation. Then he sent it simultaneously to 3 investigative journalists, 2 government agencies, and a popular social media account that exposed corporate corruption. The story broke on Wednesday morning with the headline, "War Hero Exposes Labor Crimes at Local Tech Company." By noon, Tae-won's offices were surrounded by reporters and government investigators. By evening, his company's stock price had dropped by 40%. But Hyun was already moving against his second target. He had spent weeks gathering evidence about Choi Min-ho's restaurants, including photos of health code violations and recordings of Min-ho bribing food inspectors. The evidence was damning and impossible to deny. This time, Hyun used a different approach. Instead of going to journalists first, he contacted the families who had gotten sick from eating at Minho's restaurants. Many had been too afraid to complain because Minho had connections with local officials. "I know it seems scary to speak up," Hyun told them during carefully organized meetings, "but you are not alone anymore. We have evidence, we have witnesses, and we have the legal right to demand justice." Working with Park Ji-won, who had volunteered to help after learning about his campaign, Hyun organized the victims into a united group. They filed complaints with health departments that could not be ignored or covered up. They shared their stories on social media, creating a wave of public outrage. The health department had no choice but to conduct surprise inspections of all 3 restaurants. What they found was worse than even Hyun had documented: spoiled food, dirty kitchens, and evidence of systematic violations going back years. Minho's restaurants were shut down immediately. The man who had once terrorized students for their lunch money was now facing criminal charges and financial ruin. Yang Sun-ho proved to be the most difficult target because loan sharking occupied a gray area between legal and illegal activity. But Hyun had learned from his alien commanders that the best attacks focused on an enemy's weakest point. Sun-ho's weakness was his pride. He could not resist bragging about his power over desperate families. Hyun used this against him by creating situations where Sun-ho would incriminate himself while being secretly recorded. The alien commander paused, his expression growing serious. "But remember, young warrior, this type of conflict requires different courage than battlefield heroics. You must be patient where you once were decisive. You must build instead of destroy." The hardest part, Vextoth warned, will be resisting the temptation to use your physical abilities. Your enemies will try to provoke you into violence because they know they cannot match your combat skills. They want you to become the aggressor so they can play the victim. Hyun nodded slowly. The advice made perfect sense from a strategic perspective, but it would require enormous self-control. After years of solving problems through superior firepower and tactical superiority, he would need to learn completely different methods. "I understand," he said. "Fight them with their own weapons, but better." "Exactly," Thexera replied. "They use secrets and lies to maintain power. You will use truth and transparency to destroy them. They isolate victims to make them helpless. You will build community and mutual support." The transmission began to flicker as the connection weakened across interstellar distances. "One final piece of wisdom," Thexera said. "Remember that your goal is not revenge. Revenge only perpetuates the cycle of violence. Your goal is justice, which heals societies and prevents future harm. The greatest victory," Vextoth added, "is not defeating your enemies but removing their ability to create new victims." The holographic display faded, leaving Hyun alone in the communications room. He sat quietly for several minutes, processing what his mentors had told him. Everything about his approach would need to change. Instead of confronting his enemies directly, he would have to outmaneuver them systematically. The technician who had operated the transmitter looked at him with curiosity. "Those were some impressive aliens you were talking to. What kind of advice did they give you?" Hyun stood and headed for the door. "They taught me the difference between winning a fight and winning a war." As he walked back through Seoul's busy streets, Hyun's mind was already working on the new strategy. He would need to gather allies, document evidence, and create a network of support for victims. It would take longer than direct confrontation, but the results would be permanent. His enemies thought they understood the rules of the game because they had written those rules themselves. They were about to discover that someone trained by galactic civilizations played by very different standards. The real battle was about to begin, and this time Hyun would fight it on his terms, not theirs. Saturday morning found Hyun in the basement of a government communications building, sitting before a quantum transmitter that could reach across the galaxy in real time. His military service record granted him access to the secure facility, though the technicians looked nervous about connecting a civilian to Coalition Command. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the scaled features of Commander Thexera. The reptilian officer's yellow eyes focused on Hyun with the same intensity that had once terrified new recruits. Behind him, the bridge of a coalition warship hummed with alien technology. "Young warrior," Thexera said in his translated voice, which carried amusement despite the electronic filtering. "I am pleased to see you survive your return to the homeworld. Many soldiers find peace more difficult than war." "I need advice, Commander," Hyun said directly. "I face enemies who use shame and fear as weapons instead of plasma rifles. They hide behind laws and social structures rather than meeting me in open battle." Thexera's head tilted in the reptilian gesture that meant deep thought. "Ah, you encounter the most dangerous type of opponent. Physical enemies can be defeated with superior firepower. But these creatures you describe attack the foundations of society itself." The display shifted to include Vextoth, Hyun's former battle partner. The insectoid warrior's compound eyes glittered as he studied Hyun through the transmission. When he spoke, his translated voice carried the mechanical precision of his species. "Explain the tactical situation," Vextoth clicked. "What resources do these enemies control? What weaknesses have you identified in their defensive positions?" Hyun described the network of corruption that protected his former bullies. He explained how they used money and connections to hurt anyone who opposed them, and how they hid their cruelty behind legitimate businesses and social respectability. "Fascinating," Thexera mused. "Your enemies have created what my people call a shadow territory. They control space without claiming it openly, wielding power without accepting responsibility for how they use it. How do you fight such an enemy?" Hyun asked. Vextoth answered first, his analytical mind breaking down the problem like a military equation. "In hive warfare, we encounter similar tactics from parasitic species. They infiltrate our social structures and corrupt them from within, making it difficult to attack them without damaging ourselves. The solution," Thexera continued, "is to expose them to the light. Parasites thrive in darkness and secrecy. Force them into the open where their true nature becomes visible to all." "But how?" Hyun pressed. "They have legal protection and social connections. Direct confrontation only makes them hide deeper." Thexera's scaled lips curved in what might have been a smile. "You think like a soldier when you need to think like a general. You have been fighting individual battles when you should be winning the entire war." The reptilian commander stood and moved to a tactical display on his ship's bridge. "When we faced the Zephyrian Empire, we did not defeat them by destroying their fleets one ship at a time. We exposed their crimes to the galactic community and turned their own allies against them. Your enemies depend on the silence of their victims," Vextoth added. "They require people to be isolated and afraid. Remove that isolation, and their power begins to crumble." Hyun felt understanding dawn in his mind. "You mean I should not fight them directly? I should make it impossible for them to operate in darkness." "Precisely," Thexera said. "Information warfare is more effective than physical combat against this type of enemy. Gather evidence of their crimes. Document their corruption. But most importantly, give their victims a voice and a way to speak safely." "You broke my wrist," he whimpered. "No," Hyun said calmly. "I applied pressure to nerves that temporarily disable motor function. Your wrist will work normally in about 10 minutes. If I had wanted to break it, you would need surgery." He turned to face Taewon and Minho, who were backing away slowly. "This is what you do not understand. You still think like bullies from high school. You believe that having more people on your side means you win automatically." Hyun gestured to the groaning men on the ground around him. "But I learned to fight wars against entire civilizations. I learned strategy from beings who conquered star systems before humans invented writing. You brought 6 people to fight 1 man, and you still lost." Taewon's face was pale and sweaty. "What do you want from us? Money? We can pay you to leave us alone." "I want you to stop," Hyun said simply. "Stop hurting your workers. Stop threatening families who owe you money. Stop using your power to make other people afraid." "And if we refuse?" Minho asked. though his voice shook as he spoke. Hyun smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then this was just a demonstration. Next time, I will not be so gentle. He walked past them toward the street, then paused and looked back. You made one critical error tonight. You tried to solve this problem with violence, in a place where no one could see what happened. What does that matter? Sunho groaned from the ground. It matters because now you know what I am capable of, but no one else does. The story you tell people about tonight will make you look weak and foolish. The truth will make you look even worse. Hyun disappeared into the rainy night, leaving his former tormentors to tend their wounded pride and injured employees. As he walked home, he knew this would not be the end. They would try different tactics now, more desperate and dangerous ones. But they had learned an important lesson. The scared boy they used to know was gone forever. In his place stood someone who had walked among the stars and learned the true meaning of strength. The next phase of the war would require different weapons than fists and intimidation. Hyun was ready for whatever came next. Friday evening came with heavy rain that turned Seoul's streets into rivers of neon light. Hyun was walking home from visiting Daejeon when he noticed the black car following him. It stayed 3 blocks behind, matching his pace perfectly. His alien training had taught him to spot surveillance, and this was clumsy work compared to what he had faced during the wars. He led his followers on a winding path through narrow alleys and crowded markets. The car had to stop and let men out on foot to continue tracking him. Hyun counted at least 4 of them, probably hired muscle rather than professionals. They were trying to corner him in a quiet area where there would be no witnesses. The trap was set near Park Juwon's school, in a small parking lot behind the building. Hyun walked into it deliberately, wanting to face this threat before it could spread to innocent people. As he reached the center of the empty lot, figures emerged from the shadows. Kim Tae-won stepped out first, his expensive suit looking out of place in the dingy surroundings. Choi Min-ho appeared from behind a parked truck, flanked by 3 large men who looked like they had been hired for their fists rather than their brains. Yang Sunho came last, grinning with the same cruel expression Hyun remembered from high school. "Look what we have here," Sunho said loudly. "The big war hero, all alone in the dark." "Just like old times," Minho added, cracking his knuckles. "Except now we have friends to help us teach you a lesson." Tae-won looked nervous but tried to hide it behind false bravado. "You made a big mistake coming back here, Hyun. This is our city now. We have money, power, connections. You are just a soldier without an army." Hyun stood calmly in the center of their circle, his hands relaxed at his sides. He studied each face, noting who looked confident and who seemed afraid. The hired thugs were eager for violence, but the 3 bullies were less certain than they wanted to appear. "You think this will end like our fights in high school," Hyun said quietly. "You think numbers and intimidation will work the same way they always have. We know it will," Sunho snarled, pulling a metal pipe from his jacket. "You were a coward then, and you are a coward now. All that military training will not help you against 6 men." One of the hired thugs stepped forward, swinging a fist toward Hyun's face. What happened next seemed impossible to the watching bullies. Hyun moved like liquid lightning, faster than human reflexes should allow. He caught the thug's wrist and twisted it with surgical precision, sending the man to his knees with a sharp cry of pain. Before the others could react, Hyun was already moving again. His combat training came from 5 years of fighting alongside alien warriors whose speed and strength exceeded human limits. He had learned to match creatures that could see in multiple dimensions and react to attacks that came from impossible angles. Compared to that, fighting ordinary humans felt like moving through thick water. The second thug rushed forward with a wooden club. Hyun ducked under the swing and struck pressure points that his insectoid battle partner Vextov had taught him. The man collapsed instantly, his nervous system temporarily paralyzed. The third thug tried to grab Hyun from behind, but found himself flipped through the air to land hard on the wet pavement. Hyun had used momentum and leverage rather than brute strength, techniques learned from reptilian fighters who were smaller than their enemies but infinitely more skilled. In less than 30 seconds, all three hired muscle were on the ground, groaning and unable to continue fighting. Hyun stood over them without breathing hard, his clothes barely wrinkled. Taewon, Minho, and Sunho stared in shock. The scared teenager they remembered was gone completely, replaced by something that moved and fought like it belonged on alien battlefields rather than Earth streets. "This is impossible," Minho whispered. "Humans cannot move that fast." "I learned from beings who do not think like humans," Hyun replied. "They taught me that size and numbers mean nothing if you understand how to apply force correctly." Sunho raised his metal pipe with shaking hands. "I will kill you for this. I will make you pay for embarrassing us." "With what?" Hyun asked, taking a step toward him. "A piece of metal. I have faced weapons that could vaporize buildings. I have fought creatures that breathe poison and see through time. You think a pipe frightens me?" Sunho swung the weapon desperately, but Hyun was no longer where the pipe was aimed. He appeared beside Sunho like a ghost and placed one hand on his wrist. The pipe fell to the ground with a clatter, and Sunho fell to his knees, clutching his arm. After they left, Hyun sat in his kitchen and thought about what had just happened. His enemies were trying to use the legal system against him, just like they had used school administrators and parent connections in high school. But they had made a critical mistake. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stay away from my friends, or you will regret it. Some people have longer memories than you think." Hyun recognized the writing style. It was Yang Sunho, still using the same threatening language he had perfected as a teenager. But Sunho had no idea who he was dealing with now. That evening, Hyun walked through his old neighborhood and noticed things that worried him. Minji's college had suddenly delayed processing her financial aid, claiming there were problems with her paperwork. Daehyun mentioned that 2 of his regular suppliers had called to cancel their contracts without explanation. The bullies were branching out, targeting people Hyun cared about. It was the same strategy they had used in high school, but now they had adult resources to make it happen. They were trying to isolate him by hurting anyone who might support him. Hyun made phone calls to old classmates and discovered the full scope of what was happening. People who had spoken positively about his return were suddenly having problems at work. Small business owners who had offered to help him were facing unexpected inspections and permit issues. The network was bigger and more sophisticated than he had realized. Taewon, Minho, and Sunho had spent years building connections with corrupt officials, dishonest police officers, and unethical business people. They had created a system that protected bullies and punished anyone who stood up to them. But Hyun had advantages they could not understand. His alien commanders had taught him about patience and long-term strategy. He had learned to fight enemies who controlled entire star systems, not just a few city blocks in Seoul. More importantly, he was not the helpless teenager they remembered. He had survived battles that would have broken ordinary humans. He had earned the respect of beings who measured strength not in money or connections, but in courage and honor. As he walked home through the dark streets, Hyun made a decision. His enemies wanted to play a bigger game, involving more people and higher stakes. They thought their network made them untouchable. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Hyun pulled out his communicator and sent a message to his alien mentor Thexera. It was time to ask for advice about fighting an enemy that hid behind institutions instead of meeting him in open battle. The real war was about to begin, and Hyun intended to fight it on his own terms. News of Hyun's visit to Taewon's office spread through Seoul like wildfire. By Tuesday afternoon, half their old high school class knew that Lee Hyun had returned from the wars. By Wednesday, everyone was talking about it. Hyun's phone buzzed constantly with messages from former classmates. Some were friendly, welcoming him home and asking to meet for coffee. Others seemed nervous, as if they were afraid he might remember old grudges. A few messages came from people who had been victims like him, and their words carried hope for the first time in years. "I heard what you did to Taewon. wrote Park Sujin, a girl who had been tormented for being poor. Maybe now someone will finally make them pay for what they did to us. Please be careful, wrote another message from Kim Youngbo, who still walked with a limp from when Minho had pushed him down concrete stairs. They have powerful friends now. They can hurt you in ways that did not exist when we were kids. Hyun read each message carefully. He was building a picture of how the bullying network had grown and changed over the years. It was bigger than he had imagined, with connections reaching into police departments, government offices, and business associations. On Thursday morning, Hyun visited his old friend Oh Dae-hyun at his electronics repair shop. The small store was cluttered with computer parts and broken phones, but it felt warm and honest compared to the glass towers where his enemies worked. Dae-hyun looked up from a circuit board. He was soldering and grinned when he saw Hyun walk through the door. "The famous war hero returns to visit us common people," he said with a laugh. "I am not famous, and I am not a hero," Hyun replied, but he was smiling too. Dae-hyun was one of the few people who could still make him feel like the person he used to be. "Tell that to the internet," Dae-hyun said, pulling up a news article on his computer. "Local boy returns from galactic wars with honors. Look at this. They have pictures of you receiving medals from alien commanders." Hyun looked at the screen with surprise. He had not expected his military record to become public knowledge so quickly. The article described his 5 years of service, the battles he had fought, and the commendations he had received from multiple alien species. "This changes things," Dae-hyun said seriously. "Everyone knows now that you are not just some angry kid looking for revenge. You are a decorated veteran with training that most people cannot even imagine." As if to prove his point, Dae-hyun's phone rang. The caller was nervous and spoke quickly about a problem with Choi Minho. Apparently, Minho had been calling around to their old classmates, trying to find out what Hyun was planning. He was offering money for information and threatening anyone who refused to cooperate. "He called me 3 times yesterday," Dae-hyun explained after hanging up. "He wants to know where you live, what you do all day, who you talk to." I told him nothing, but he is getting desperate. That afternoon, Hyun discovered just how desperate when police officers arrived at his apartment. 2 detectives in cheap suits stood at his door, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Lee Hyun," said the older detective, "we need to ask you some questions about threatening a businessman named Kim Tae-won." Hyun invited them inside and served tea while they explained the situation. According to their report, Tae-won claimed that Hyun had threatened him with physical violence and demanded money. The story was completely false, but it had been filed through official channels. "We have to investigate all complaints," the younger detective said apologetically. "But between you and me, this feels like someone trying to use us to fight their personal battles." Hyun showed them his military identification and service record. He explained calmly that he had visited Tae-won's office to discuss business practices, not to threaten anyone. The detectives asked a few more questions, but their hearts were not in it. "Look," the older detective said as they prepared to leave. "Your service record is impressive, really impressive. Commands from 3 different alien species, medals for valor under fire, recommendations from Coalition High Command. This is the kind of stuff that gets people security clearances and government jobs. I want you to remember something, Tae-won. Do you remember what you used to call me in high school? Worthless. Pathetic. A waste of space. You said I would never amount to anything." Tae-won nodded weakly, unable to speak. "While you were here playing businessman and getting rich by cheating your workers, I was fighting across the galaxy. I stood beside alien warriors and earned their respect. I faced enemies that could have destroyed our entire planet. I protected Earth and everyone on it, including you." Hyun straightened up and walked around the desk until he was standing directly beside Tae-won's chair. The businessman cowered in his seat, making himself as small as possible. "You have built your success by being the same bully you always were," Hyun continued. "You use fear and intimidation to control people who cannot fight back. But I am not one of those people anymore." He reached over and tapped the data pad with one finger. You have 1 week to fix your labor practices. Pay your workers what they deserve. Stop threatening people who ask for their rights. Treat them with the respect that every human being deserves. And if I don't? Taewon whispered. Hyun smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then this information finds its way to government investigators, news reporters, and social media. Your customers will learn what kind of man they are doing business with. Your employees will learn that they have legal rights you cannot violate. Your competitors will learn about your illegal practices. He leaned down so his face was level with Taewon's. But more importantly, everyone will know that Kim Taewon is still the same coward who picked on smaller kids in high school. They will see that success has not made you a better person, just a richer bully. Taewon was sweating now despite the cool air conditioning. His expensive shirt was sticking to his back, and his hands were shaking openly. I understand. I will make changes. I promise. Good, Hyun said, standing back up. I am glad we could have this conversation like civilized adults. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Taewon, I will be checking to make sure you keep your promises. I have become very good at watching people without them knowing it. Hyun left the office and walked past the curious stares of the other employees. In the elevator, he allowed himself a small smile. The first move had been made. His old enemy now knew that the scared teenager was gone forever. But this was just the beginning. Choi Minho and Yang Sunho were still out there, still hurting innocent people. And somewhere in the city, Park Ju-won was trying to protect students who reminded Hyun of his younger self. The game had started, and Hyun intended to win it completely. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Hyun dressed in his best clothes, which were still simple and dark. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back. The scared teenager was gone forever. In his place stood someone who had learned to walk among aliens and survive in the depths of space. He took the subway to the business district and walked through the lobby of Taewon's building. The security guards looked at him but said nothing. Something about the way Hyun carried himself made them step aside automatically. He had learned this presence from his alien commander Thexera, who could silence a room full of warriors with just a look. The elevator carried him to the 20th floor, where Taewon's office occupied the corner of the building. Through the glass walls, Hyun could see his old tormentor sitting behind a massive desk. Taewon was shouting at a young employee who stood in front of him with his head down. The scene looked exactly like high school, with Taewon using his power to make someone else feel small and afraid. Hyun opened the door and walked into the office without knocking. His footsteps were completely silent on the expensive carpet. The employee looked up first, then Taewon followed his gaze. Both men froze when they saw the figure standing in the doorway. "You can leave us alone now," Hyun said quietly to the employee. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded troops in battle. The young man glanced nervously between Hyun and his boss, then quickly left the room and closed the door behind him. Taewon stared at Hyun for a long moment, his mouth hanging open. The expensive suit and gold jewelry could not hide the fact that he had grown soft over the years. His face was pale, and his hand shook slightly as recognition dawned. "Lee Hyun," Taewon said, his voice coming out as barely a whisper. "I heard you came back from the war." "Kim Taewon," Hyun replied, walking slowly toward the desk. Each step was measured and controlled, like a predator approaching its prey. "You look well. Success seems to agree with you." Taewon tried to recover his composure. He straightened in his chair and forced a fake smile onto his face. "Yes, business has been very good to me. I have worked hard to build this company into something special." Hyun stopped in front of the desk and looked down at his former bully. From this angle, Taewon seemed even smaller and weaker. "I have been hearing interesting things about your business practices, about how you treat your employees." The fake smile disappeared from Taewon's face. "I don't know what you mean. I run a legitimate company. Everything I do is legal." "Legal and right are not always the same thing," Hyun said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data pad, the kind used by coalition forces for field reports. I have been talking to your workers. They tell interesting stories about working conditions here. Taewon's eyes went wide as he stared at the device. What is that? Evidence, Hyun said simply. He placed the data pad on the desk and slid it across to Taewon. Pay records showing wages below the legal minimum. Documentation of unpaid overtime. Recordings of threats made to employees who asked about their rights. Taewon picked up the data pad with trembling hands. His face grew more pale as he scrolled through the information. Where did you get this? How did you? I learned many useful skills during my time away. Hyun interrupted. Skills that help me find the truth about people. Skills that help me see who someone really is beneath their expensive clothes and fancy offices. The room fell silent except for the sound of Taewon's heavy breathing. Outside the glass walls, other employees were trying to look busy, but Hyun could see them glancing nervously toward the office. Word was already spreading through the building that something important was happening. What do you want? Taewon asked, his voice now high and frightened. It was the same tone Hyun remembered from their teenage years, except now the roles were reversed. Hyun leaned forward and placed his hands flat on the desk. His eyes locked onto Taewon's and held them with an intensity that made the other man want to look away. When Hyun spoke, his voice was soft, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. She looked up from her work, and their eyes met across the room. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then recognition dawned on her face, and her mouth opened in surprise. Lee Hyun, she said softly, standing up from her table. Is that really you? Hyun stood as well, suddenly feeling nervous in a way that alien battlefields had never made him feel. Hello, Ji-won. It has been a long time. She walked over to his table, studying his face with wonder. You look so different. I almost did not recognize you. When did you come back to Earth? A few days ago, he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Would you like to sit? I would enjoy talking with you. Ji-won sat down, still staring at him with amazement. I heard you joined the military and went to fight in the coalition wars. Everyone said you might never come back. I almost did not, Hyun admitted. But here I am. They talked for an hour about safe topics. Ji-won told him about her job teaching high school students. She said she loved helping young people learn and grow. She asked him about his time in the military, but Hyun kept his answers short and vague. Some things were too dark to share with someone so good. As they prepared to leave, Ji-won's expression grew sad. Hyun, I need to tell you something. The bullying problem at our old school never really went away. There are still students who get picked on every day, just like you were. Sometimes I feel helpless to stop it. Hyun felt anger building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. What kind of bullying? The same old things. Kids getting pushed around, having their money stolen, being made fun of online. Some of the worst cases involve students whose families owe money to local loan sharks. The kids get threatened and scared because of their parents' debts. Hyun knew exactly which loan shark she was talking about. Yang Sunho was still destroying lives, just like he had in high school. I wish someone could do something about it, Ji-won said with a sigh. But these bullies have money and connections now. They seem untouchable. Hyun looked into her eyes and saw the same kindness that had attracted him years ago. She still wanted to protect people who could not protect themselves. She still believed in doing what was right. Maybe someone will, he said quietly. Sometimes people who seem untouchable are not as strong as they appear. Ji-won smiled at him, though she looked puzzled by his words. They exchanged phone numbers before saying goodbye. As Hyun walked home through the dark streets, he thought about everything he had learned. His reconnaissance was complete. Now it was time to plan his next move. Hyun woke before dawn, just as he had every day for the past 5 years. His body moved automatically through the morning routine he had learned in the coalition military. Push-ups, sit-ups, and stretches that kept his muscles ready for combat. Even though he was safe on Earth, old habits kept him alive. He dressed in simple clothes and stepped out into the Seoul morning. The city was just waking up, with delivery trucks rumbling through empty streets and early workers hurrying to catch buses. Hyun moved through it all like a ghost, watching everything but drawing no attention to himself. His first stop was Kim Tae-won's office building. It stood tall and shiny in the business district, with Tae-won's company name written in big letters across the front. Hyun found a coffee shop across the street and sat by the window. He ordered black coffee and waited. At exactly 9 in the morning, a black luxury car pulled up to the building. Tae-won stepped out wearing an expensive suit and gold watch. He looked older and softer than Hyun remembered, but his face still held the same cruel expression. The same sneer that had made Hyun's stomach hurt with fear all those years ago. Hyun watched as Tae-won entered the building. Through the glass walls, he could see his old tormentor talking to employees. Even from a distance, Hyun could tell Tae-won was angry about something. He pointed his finger at people and raised his voice. Workers around him looked scared and nervous, just like Hyun had felt in high school. After 2 hours of watching, Hyun left the coffee shop and walked to Tae-won's building. He did not go inside. Instead, he found the employee entrance in the back alley. At lunchtime, workers came out looking tired and stressed. Hyun approached a young woman who seemed especially upset. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I am thinking about applying for a job here. Is it a good place to work?" The woman looked around nervously before answering. "The pay is terrible, and the boss treats everyone like garbage. He makes people work late without extra money and fires anyone who complains. I would look somewhere else if I were you." Hyun thanked her and walked away. His alien commanders had taught him that information was more valuable than weapons. Now he had his first piece of intelligence about Kim Tae-won's current life. Next, he visited Choi Min-ho's restaurants. There were 3 of them scattered around the city, all claiming to serve traditional Korean food. Hyun ate at each one over the next few days, watching how they operated. The food was cheap and the restaurants were always busy, but something felt wrong. At the second restaurant, Hyun noticed that the kitchen looked dirty. Food was left out too long, and the workers did not wash their hands properly. At the third restaurant, he saw Min-ho himself screaming at a teenage server who had dropped a plate. The boy looked terrified and close to tears. Hyun remembered that feeling very well. After a week of careful watching, he had learned disturbing things about his old bullies. Tae-won paid his workers less than minimum wage and threatened to fire anyone who complained to the government. Min-ho's restaurants had serious health problems that could make customers sick, but he paid bribes to inspectors to keep them quiet. Yang Sun-ho was the worst of all. Hyun found him at a small office near the old neighborhood, meeting with desperate families who needed money. Sun-ho lent them cash but charged such high interest that they could never pay it back. When they fell behind, he sent thugs to their homes to scare them. All 3 of his former tormentors had become successful at hurting other people. They were still bullies, just with more power now. On Friday evening, Hyun was walking past his old high school when he saw a familiar figure coming out of the main entrance. His heart stopped for a moment. It was Park Ju-won, carrying a stack of papers and looking as beautiful as he remembered. She had changed less than the others. Her hair was shorter now, and she wore glasses, but her kind eyes were exactly the same. She walked with the same gentle grace that had made teenage Hyun dream about her for years. Hyun followed her at a distance, not sure what he planned to do. She stopped at a small coffee shop near the school and went inside. After a moment of hesitation, Hyun followed her. The shop was quiet and warm, with soft music playing in the background. Ju-won sat at a table in the corner, grading papers with a red pen. Hyun bought a coffee and chose a table where he could see her without being obvious about it. Hyun felt his heart speed up a little. He remembered Ju-won very well. She had been kind to everyone, even to him when others were not looking. She had beautiful eyes and a gentle smile. He had dreamed of asking her out, but never found the courage. She is a teacher now at our old high school, Minji continued. She never married. Some people say she is waiting for someone special, but I do not know if that is true. Hyun nodded slowly. He pushed back from the table and walked to the window. Seoul spread out below him, millions of lights in the growing darkness. Somewhere out there were the people who had made his teenage years a nightmare. They were probably having dinner in expensive restaurants or relaxing in their big homes, never thinking about the scared boy they had tormented years ago. But that scared boy was gone now. In his place stood someone who had learned hard lessons about justice and strength from alien warriors who valued honor above all things. Someone who had faced death and discovered he was much braver than he had ever imagined. Hyun touched the small communicator on his wrist, a gift from his alien commander. He could call for help if he needed it, but he knew he would handle this himself. Some battles were meant to be fought alone. I think I will take a walk around the old neighborhood tomorrow, he told his sister. See how much has changed. Minji smiled at him, but something in his voice made her shiver slightly. She did not know what her brother had become during his years away, but she could see it was something powerful and dangerous. She hoped his old enemies were smart enough to stay out of his way. The warrior had returned home. The transport ship touched down at Seoul Spaceport with a soft hiss of cooling engines. Lee Hyun stepped onto the metal ramp, his boots making quiet sounds against the surface. 5 years had passed since he left Earth as a scared 18-year-old boy. Now he was coming back as something else entirely. Hyun carried only a small bag over his shoulder. Everything he owned from his time in the Galactic Coalition Wars fit into that one simple pack. His clothes were plain and dark. His face showed no emotion as he walked through the busy spaceport. Other passengers rushed past him, excited to be home or nervous about their journeys. Hyun moved slowly and carefully, like someone who had learned that quick movements could mean death. The young man looked different now. His body had grown lean and hard from years of combat training. Scars marked his hands and arms, pale lines against his skin that told stories he would never share with civilians. His eyes were the biggest change, though. They had seen things that most humans never would. They held a weight that made people look away when they met his stare. Seoul felt strange to Hyun as he walked through the familiar streets. The buildings seemed smaller than he remembered. The sounds of traffic and people talking felt too loud after years of listening for enemy movements in the quiet of space. Everything moved too fast around him. He found himself checking corners and watching rooftops out of habit, even though he knew no enemies waited for him here. His family home looked exactly the same as when he had left. The small apartment building sat between two larger ones, its old brick walls showing their age. Hyun climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and stood outside the door for a long moment. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the doorbell. This was harder than facing alien warriors had been. The door opened, and his sister Minji threw herself into his arms. She was crying and laughing at the same time, holding him tight like she was afraid he might disappear again. Minji had been 13 when he left. Now she was 18 and looked so much older. She pulled him inside and made him sit at the kitchen table while she heated up food and talked non-stop about everything that had happened while he was gone. "You look so different, Hyun," she said as she placed a bowl of rice in front of him. "You seem bigger somehow. Not just your muscles, but everything about you." Hyun nodded but did not say much. He ate slowly and listened to his sister talk. She told him about finishing high school and starting college. She talked about their parents who had died in an accident 2 years ago. She mentioned old friends and classmates, what they were doing now, who had gotten married, who had found success. Then she said something that made Hyun stop eating. "Do you remember Kim Tae-won from school? He owns a big company now. His father left it to him when he retired. Tae-won drives an expensive car and lives in one of those fancy apartment buildings downtown. Choi Min-ho has 3 restaurants now. He always posts pictures on social media of himself eating expensive food and traveling to other countries." Hyun remembered Tae-won and Min-ho very well. They had made his life hell during high school. Every day they found new ways to hurt him and embarrass him in front of other students. They pushed him downstairs, stole his lunch money, and called him names that still echoed in his head sometimes. They made him afraid to go to school and afraid to go home because he felt like such a failure. "What about Yang Sun-o?" Hyun asked quietly. "Oh, him." Minji made a disgusted face. "He hangs around the old neighborhood still. People say he lends money to families who are desperate and then charges them too much to pay it back. He acts like he is some kind of big shot, but everyone knows he is just a bully who never grew up." Hyun set down his chopsticks and stared at his hands. While he had been fighting across the galaxy to protect Earth from alien invasions, his old tormentors had been living comfortable lives here. They had grown rich and powerful while he had nearly died a dozen times defending people who did not even know his name. "There is something else," Minji said softly. "Do you remember Park Ji-won from your class? The girl you always liked but never talked to." But the most important changes were personal and individual. Former victims walked with confidence instead of fear. Families felt secure instead of threatened. Young people learned that standing up for others was not only possible but expected. On a cold December evening, 6 months after his return, Hyun received an unexpected visitor. Kim Tae-won stood at his apartment door, looking nothing like the arrogant businessman he had once been. His clothes were ordinary, his posture humble, his expression genuinely remorseful. "I know you have no reason to listen to me," Tae-won said quietly, "but I wanted to say something before I left Seoul." Hyun invited him inside and made tea while Tae-won struggled to find words. "I got a job at a small company," Tae-won finally said. "Regular pay, normal hours, no power over other people. For the first time in years, I go to sleep without wondering who I hurt that day." He looked directly at Hyun with eyes that held real understanding. "I spent so many years thinking that having power over others made me strong. But watching you these past months, I finally understand what real strength looks like." "What does it look like?" Hyun asked. "Using your power to protect people instead of hurting them," Tae-won replied. "Building things instead of tearing them down. Making the world better instead of just making yourself richer." They talked for 2 hours about responsibility, redemption, and the possibility of becoming a better person. When Tae-won left, he promised to spend the rest of his life trying to help rather than harm others. As Hyun watched his former enemy walk away into the snowy night, he felt something he had not expected: hope for everyone's capacity to change. Even bullies could learn to be better people if they faced real consequences and found proper guidance. The scared teenager who had left Earth was truly gone now. In his place stood someone who understood that the greatest victories came not from destroying enemies, but from creating a world where such enemies could no longer exist. The final confrontation was not with fists or weapons, but with the possibility of redemption itself. 1 year later, Seoul looked the same but felt completely different. Hyun walked through the streets where he had once been afraid, seeing changes that went far deeper than new buildings or fresh paint. The transformation was in the people themselves, in how they carried themselves and treated each other. He stopped at Oh Dae-yeon's electronics shop, which had grown into a small chain of 3 stores. Business was thriving because workers throughout the city trusted Dae-yeon's reputation for honest dealing and fair treatment of employees. "Look at this," Dae-yeon said proudly, showing Hyun a letter from the city government. "They want me to join a committee that helps small businesses learn about worker rights and fair labor practices. Me giving advice to other business owners. Can you believe it?" Hyun smiled at his friend's excitement. The transformation of their community had created opportunities for good people to rise and lead. "You deserve it. You always treated people with respect, even when it would have been easier to follow bad examples." Their conversation was interrupted by a group of high school students who had come to buy electronics for a school project. They talked excitedly about their work, clearly unafraid and confident in themselves. One girl mentioned that she was organizing a campaign to help homeless families in their neighborhood. "Students today are so different from when we were kids," Dae-hyun observed after they left. They believe they can change things instead of just accepting whatever happens to them. That afternoon, Hyun visited Park Ji-won at their old high school. She had been promoted to vice principal and was implementing anti-bullying programs that had become a model for other schools throughout Korea. Her office was filled with thank you letters from students and parents whose lives had been changed by the new policies. "We had another success story yesterday," she told Hyun as they walked through the hallways. A group of students stood up to protect a classmate who was being picked on. 2 years ago, those same kids would have looked the other way or joined in with the bullying. They stopped at a bulletin board covered with photos and stories from students who had overcome difficulties with the help of peer support groups. Each story was proof that the culture of the school had fundamentally changed. "The best part," Ji-won continued, "is that we are getting requests from schools in other cities to help them start similar programs. What we built here is spreading across the country." That evening, Hyun attended a community meeting where former victims of workplace abuse were now helping other workers understand their rights. The woman who had been too afraid to complain about Taewon's illegal practices was now leading workshops on labor law. "I never thought I would have the courage to speak in public," she told the group. "But seeing how much difference we can make when we work together has given me strength I never knew I had." The meeting was attended by local police officers, government officials, and business leaders who had learned that supporting workers and preventing abuse was better for everyone in the long run. The old network of corruption had been replaced by one of accountability and mutual support. As winter turned to spring, Hyun received a message that would change his life again. Ambassador Kilneth contacted him through secure channels with an unusual request from the Galactic Coalition. "The Coalition Council has been studying your methods for resolving internal conflicts," the alien diplomat explained during their video call. "Your approach to transforming a hostile social environment without resorting to violence has impressed species across the galaxy." The ambassador continued with an offer that Hyun had never expected. "We would like you to serve as a special advisor on peaceful conflict resolution. There are worlds throughout the coalition dealing with corruption and social predation similar to what you faced on Earth." "You mean other planets have bullying problems?" Hyun asked. "The tendency for some individuals to abuse power over others appears to be common among many intelligent species," Kelneth replied. "But few societies have developed effective methods for stopping such behavior without causing greater harm. Your model of systematic exposure combined with community building could help billions of beings." Hyun considered the offer carefully. It would mean leaving Earth again, but this time he would be traveling as a teacher rather than a soldier. Instead of fighting wars, he would be preventing them by helping societies solve their internal problems peacefully. Before making his decision, he walked through his old neighborhood one more time. Families sat together in parks without fear. Children played freely in streets that were once controlled by predators. Small businesses flourished because honest competition had replaced corruption and intimidation. At the spot where Yang Sun-ho used to collect his illegal debts, a community center now offered financial counseling and job training. Where Taewon's workers once suffered in silence, a labor rights clinic helped people understand and defend their dignity. Most importantly, where scared teenagers once ate lunch alone, afraid to make friends who might become targets, young people now gathered in groups that welcomed everyone and protected each other. Hyun made his decision that night. He would accept the coalition's offer, but with conditions. He wanted to return to Earth regularly to check on the progress here. He wanted Ji-won to help develop curricula that could be adapted for different species and cultures. And he wanted the programs they had built to continue growing without depending on his presence. The goal was never to be the hero who saves everyone. He explained to Ji-won as they planned his departure. It was to create a system where everyone can save themselves and each other. On the day before his departure, the community organized a farewell ceremony. Hundreds of people came to thank him. But Hyun insisted that they were thanking the wrong person. "I did not change anything by myself," he told the crowd. "Every person who found the courage to speak up, every worker who stood up for their rights, every student who protected a classmate, every business owner who chose fairness over profit. You are the ones who transformed this place. As his transport ship lifted off from Seoul spaceport, Hyun looked down at the city lights spreading below him. Somewhere in that glow, former victims were becoming protectors, and future generations were learning that bullies could be stopped when good people worked together. The scared teenager who had left Earth as a refugee from cruelty was returning to the stars as an ambassador of hope. He carried with him the most powerful weapon any warrior could possess, proof that even the darkest situations could be transformed through courage, wisdom, and community. The galaxy was waiting to learn what humans could teach about turning enemies into allies and building strength through compassion rather than fear. His journey was just beginning.